We are for another dialogue with a conscious thought leader. And welcome, Otto Scharmer. You're the guest this evening or this morning, wherever you are. And some housekeeping. We call it a dialogue, and those that dial in more frequently know it is meant to be a dialogue, interactive. We'll roughly kick it off, Otto, myself, with a couple of questions, get the flow going. There's so much theoretically we could talk about, but we have to limit ourselves to 1 hour. And roughly, it's not a hard rule. After 30 minutes, I will definitely invite your question, and I will actually remind you, please, and it's not limited to questions. Any comment is welcome. Put it in the chat, and then as a moderator, I will try to manage either group some questions and directly ask Otto, or actually deviate and then invite you maybe asking a question directly. So having said that, welcome, Otto. It's great to have you. It's actually an honor because when I titled this little video cast a couple of years back, Dialogues with Conscious Thought Leaders, I didn't expect to have one of the more prominent thought leaders, conscious thought leaders. You use the word conscious quite often in all of your work. I'm sure many people have knowledge either of your work, but you personally, in terms of your work, very influential, since the theory you, and then some of the books, the latest one we're going to go into on 7 practices to transforming self, society, and business, as well as leading from the emerging future. I have it here next to me. In the introduction, I'm going to keep it super short. I mean, Otto is known to be a senior lecturer at MIT, and he's dealing with, and he will tell us about it, anything around systemic and endemic transformation processes and the underlying systems. And I have a kind of a personal question to you, Otto. You come from Germany. Give us a little background in 2 sentences where you actually come from and what brought you to the MIT.
Hello, everyone. Good evening in Europe. It's great to connect and to reconnect, Claudia and Konstantin. So, yeah, I was born and raised close to Hamburg on a farm, and I grew up there. I think kind of the regenerative biodynamic farm practices kind of clearly informed my thinking. I tried to, I was part of the peace movement and the green movement back then, the anti-nuke movement around regenerative energy. And I realized I really needed to do more than just running against the symptoms of something I didn't like. So what are some of the deeper root issues? That was my question. A lot has to do with the economy. I studied economics when I did my PhD on, a topic which is reflexive modernization of capitalism as a revolution from within. I had a sobering insight, which is I could talk about a lot, but was I really useful to any of this stuff, right? Was I really useful to entrepreneurs, to change makers in the field? And the answer to that question was sobering. That brought me to MIT, really. So, and the reason I went to back then the MIT Learning Center, some of you may remember Peter Senge, The Fifth Discipline, kind of best-selling book back then in the 90s that didn't really invent the topic of organizational learning, but he brought it really into the boardrooms of management worldwide. And what attracted me in his institute, the MIT Learning Center that he formed back then, was that they explored these questions of innovation and change and systems change, not just by talking about it, which I had experienced before, but by running practical experiments, mostly with 12 companies, mostly global companies, that were sponsoring that institute. And that's kind of really this learning by doing and discovering by doing approach, action learning and action research. That's really what attracted me. And, I came there as a postdoc for a couple of years. And ever since, I have not managed to move on. So that's kind of my career in a nutshell.
Thanks. I want people to connect just a little bit. That's why I asked this question to you as a person, kind of where you come from, what is your, path into this. Now we're going to do a jump right into the main topic, and we labeled it presencing specific practices, which we'll explore here, on transforming self, society, and business. And the first question is going to be spot on presencing itself. Some people may have an idea. To some people, they may have an idea of what they may have an interpretation of it. But in the short gist, I'm sure you explained it many times, explain the concept of presencing different than what some people may interpret to intuition, strategic insight, or mindfulness. You have a very specific meaning to presencing as a core practice. Introduce us to it.
Okay. So I would like to start with, obviously, presencing is a word that you don't find in a dictionary, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. So why would anyone who tries to be helpful rather than more confusing come up with a new word that no one knows? And the reason is because it is pointing us to perhaps the most important phenomenon that's going on in the world today, which doesn't have a word. And here's how I stumbled into that. Shortly I arrived at MIT, an interview project with 150 entrepreneurs and innovators in business, technology, society, and culture. And so basically people who created new things in their area, kind of that changed how their domain is actually working. And in listening to these people, I had a very, I'm almost embarrassed to say insight because it's so obvious, and yet it's usually not considered. I had a very basic insight, and the insight is this. There are two sources of learning and leadership. One is the past, and the other one is the emerging future. And pretty much all our processes in schools and universities, and also in basically learning practices in companies, are based on reflecting the experiences of the past. Yet, when I talk to these entrepreneurs, I realize that's not what they do. They operate on a different process. And it's a process that is not just reflecting the experience of the past, but that's tuning into something that isn't quite there yet. Tuning into a space of possibility that in their own experience is looking at them because it depends on them to manifest. It's not going to happen without you. And when I really thought about that, I realized this is not only the experience of the entrepreneur, of any kind of great entrepreneur or innovator, but it also had been my experience as a change maker in society, in the environmental and in the peace movement. It is the direct connection to a future that is very different to what's existing today. And that future, that possibility of the future, is looking at you because it depends on you to happen. It's not going to happen without you. So the future is a space of possibility that looks at us because it depends on us to manifest. And I realized that perhaps is the most important experience we can have as human beings. Kind of that really is what makes us different. And we don't have a word for that. And that's what I mean with presencing. So presencing is not something I make up mentally. It's not foresight. It doesn't tell you what's going to happen. It's not a prediction. It's not an
Okay.
extension of the past. Presencing is a possibility, is the connection to a possibility that looks at you because it depends on you to manifest. And that's,
Okay.
that's really, it's kind of, if you want to have it in a single line, it's kind of presencing is the capacity to sense and actualize the future as it emerges.
This is a great intro because it leads me to double click on the word sensing. And given the audience consists largely of conscious business people or consultants that help business people using some of the, I'm sure, using your techniques in very practical ways, sensing, exactly as you explained, different to predicting, different to analyzing the past and then extrapolating into the future. How does that work practically in companies when you see they come actually close to that? Give us a flavor on the practicality of sensing.
Well, there's like a bunch, right? Kind of, I would say, a good starting point is always listening, right? And that's, I have found
Okay.
that pretty practical. Listening of all leadership skills and capacities is certainly the one that's most underrated. We all know there's a lot that's overrated in leadership, right? So that doesn't need another recount. But in terms of underrated, that's kind of listening, I would say, is on the top there. And deepening the quality of listening is a huge leverage point because it changes your experience of the world and your relationship to the world, right? Not only to other stakeholders, but to really what's going on around you. And if you change your experience and your relationships, you basically change everything. So that would be, I mean, that's one possible gateway. But let me give you another example. I would say a good way of making that maybe more accessible is sensing journeys, right?
Mhm.
Now, what is a sensing journey? It basically has two main components. One is you put yourself, it's the outer and the inner, right? The outer part is you put yourself into the places of most potential. So, whatever the problem is you're dealing with or the challenge and so on, there is like there are places that are relevant to that situation. And some of
Yeah.
them you may know well, and some of them you don't. So basically you pick one that's highly relevant and you don't know a lot. So that's kind of what I mean with places of most potential. And the other one is the inner part. That's the listening. And so in theory, kind of the three main instruments of knowing or that we try to cultivate really is open mind, open heart, open will.
Hmm.
What is open mind? Open mind is basically the capacity to hold back your habits of judgment. And you all know examples, right? You take, say, leaders to a phenomenal environment, kind of where they see really what's totally relevant for them, and then they say, "Oh, this is only this or that," right? So it's not
Mm.
enough. The outer condition is not enough. So suspending the habits of judgment is really the capacity to look with fresh eyes, right, and to hold back kind of all the stuff you already know and allow data talk to you, right? That's the essence really of all science. Number
Yeah.
two, open heart. So what does that mean? It basically means, you know, listening from the empathic listening, right? So listening from the viewpoint of the stakeholder or the people you are talking to. That can be a person reporting to you. It can be your boss, can be your client, can be in a personal, can be your partner, right? So whoever it is, so you're not listening just from outside, but you're tuning into that person's perspective. And that's so empathic listening is a skill that we have as humans. And how do I know whether or not I'm activating that level? Well, if you do, you forget your own agenda, right? What it is you're going to say next. And you all, I mean, it is really experientially, it feels like you take a deep dive into the other person's world, right? So you forget a little bit your own stuff and you begin to sense and feel from the viewpoint of that person's perspectives, putting ourselves in other people's shoes. I mean, in all languages, we have this phrase. So,
Okay.
with a reason. So that's kind of number two. And then, the third inner condition that I would say in a sensing journey is less relevant, but it comes in later in the process, is open will. And what is open will? It's kind of letting go and letting come. Letting go of the old and letting come of something that we don't know yet, right? And that we need
Sure.
some courage perhaps
Sure.
to lean
Yeah.
into.
I want to quickly take a question from the audience already, because they need some orientation on presencing and sensing. I know in many cases you use the word, which is why I use it, sensing into the future. And you as well use the word sensing now, while presensing equally is part of the theory U. Can you help the audience on combining or distinguishing the two, how they combine and interlock?
Yeah. So presencing includes sensing, but not the other way around.
Okay.
The difference. So here's the shorthand to explain what presencing is. It's deep sensing.
Okay.
So sensing, normal sensing is tuning into what is, okay? Tuning into current reality, understanding the current forces at play in a situation, and so on and so forth, as I just explained.
Yeah.
Presencing is the deep sensing. So it's not only tuning into what is, but also tuning into what is wanting to emerge, what is looking
Okay.
at me
Thank
that
you. Beautiful.
needs me to manifest.
Beautiful. I want to double click on some things that you said. You mentioned theory U. You mentioned that at some point, I think probably at the bottom, that has a lot to do with forgetting your own agenda. And you mentioned the term letting go and inviting in or letting come. And at some different point, you even talk about, it's not about the words, that it requires a death of a small ego. And the curiosity I have, again, moving into practical terrain here, is that realistic? And what practices have you seen for CEOs of a corporation to let go? That sounds very noble, very intuitive. People say, yeah, of course we should. Have you seen good practices to combine them? Because it doesn't come natural for leaders to let go, because everything they learned in the last decades was to control. Help us to navigate how you suggest and how you actually help leaders to do that art of letting go and having a death of a small ego.
I'm not opposed to ego. I think ego is underrated. And I think the trick is to look at the positive part of the ego, right? There is something
Mm,
positive. And the positive thing is I take responsibility for my own stuff. That's something positive. So where's the problem?
yeah,
It's too narrow, right? It's just kind of me, me, me. I mean, that doesn't get you anywhere. So then the next is, my stakeholders in the company or my family and personal businesses and so on. But still, that is also narrow, right? What's the next? The next. So I think kind of that's how I see it. I'm not an enemy of the ego. I look at the positive spark that's there,
okay,
and I'm looking at the limitation. And I'm asking myself, how can the ego transform and evolve itself so it includes the entire eco, right? That's kind of the ego to eco journey. And I would say, so basically, I mean, I agree with you, Konstantin, but I also want to take a little counterpoint, right? I think it is clearly, I mean, we see massive leadership failure and, kind of probably the worst leadership we have seen in years. I mean, it's on many stages. I don't need to name them all. But I would also say that there is more than one leader in every institution. And there's actually, when you like coach people one or two levels down below the board and so on, and when you see kind of what leadership teams in many institutions are wrestling with, you see actually that the journey from ego to eco is already well underway. And not because of the moral teachings, right, of this person or another person, or not because they talk about conscious capitalism or any of that. No. You know why it is? Because of reality. We all need to deal with reality. And it's the complexity of the reality that we face that is forcing us to broaden and deepen our awareness. I will give you an example. So I coach people in business, in government, international institutions, and in NGOs. And what I find is that they all deal with the same issues in the following respect, which is that the toughest leadership challenges that they face are leadership challenges that they cannot solve alone. They are challenges that, in order to be successful against, in order to deliver against their targets, they need to involve other stakeholders that don't report to them, right? They may be in other organizations, they may be in other departments, I don't know, they may be even in other sectors. And then that means practically, so again, I'm just talking about reality. I'm not talking about consciousness first or culture first. To be successful in that, you need to change the behavior of these people. That's what they need to do. But if they don't report to you, how do you do that? And the answer is by leveraging the quality of relationship, right? So it's kind of the quality of your relationship. That's the lever that you have. And in many cases, you need to increase the quality of relationship before you can change them from one behavior to the other. And how do you increase the quality of relationship kind of to all these stakeholders? By shifting your listening, right? That's the key. By shifting the inner place from that you operate. And that's the core of Theory U, right? You change the world by changing and shifting the inner place from that you operate. How? By opening the mind, the heart, the will, the stuff we just talked about.
Yep.
So that's what I would say as a counterpoint, right? Because so that's the real world curriculum that we are dealing with today. It's regardless whether you talk about consciousness or not, you need to deal with this. And that's where the leverage is. So it's kind of the reality that we face is already ecosystemic. And yes, most of our mindsets are stuck in an ecosystemic frame. But when you engage with that reality, the real world curriculum is teaching you to open your ego mindset to something
Indeed.
that is more inclusive of the eco.
Indeed. That's a great answer. Thank you. I'm curious, switching a question to the audience. I will put it in the chat, and while we keep talking, I invite you to answer. And the question is actually, how many of you in the audience have already witnessed or practiced? And when I use the word presencing, I don't mean it in the strict sense that Otto defines and suggested. You can use other aspects that have to do with, I trusted my gut, I saw it coming. But I'm curious, how many of you can relate to this kind of practice? I put the question in the chat, and please answer in the chat so we can get your own experience. Again, It's not about relating to the definition and having participated in a U school or a presencing workshop. And while you labor on the question, let's do the next move. Actually, you outlined 7 specific practices, Otto. Maybe, given this is very short time, you can quickly articulate. Why don't we take some time and read through the comments? That makes you much more valuable. And this actually may be more inspiring. So I give everybody a minute or two, and we can read through the answers versus rushing through it. Beautiful. Thank you, Daniela. It's interesting. I'm not surprised that many of them use body as well. That's a great echo chamber. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Carolina, if you go on mute, thank you. Well, thanks for that. It was very insightful. We will share these comments afterwards. I do want to continue because why don't we explore the specific practices? Because the challenges are big, and Otto just reminded us that the reality and the challenging reality actually is what is then becomes a teacher, and people turn into, I cannot address and solve this alone. Now, you outline 7 specific practices, and as your book title says, to transform self, society, and business. So they're very broad. They're not only meant to be transformation tools for self. Quickly, can you speak to maybe in a couple lines to each of them so people get a sense of what exactly are these practices? And
Sure.
I'll put them in the chat at the same time so people don't have to take notes or look them up.
So thanks for the reminder. I mean, let me first comment on the chat. I think it's just remarkable what we see, right? And that is that the experience, the deep sensing experience that I've been talking about is not at all something that's unique and limited to very few, say, special individuals or something like that. It's not even something that needs decades or life cycles of training, right? It is something that is much more widely distributed in the realm of leadership and change today than most people realize. Most people that I have interviewed actually basically said, it's just me. Kind of they assume kind of they are the only weird person with those type of experiences. And so that was when I did the research for Theory U. Now we live in a different moment, right? Where kind of these deeper experiences are much more part of the conversation, I would say. And nevertheless, it is kind of perhaps you felt the same when you read the chat that, oh, it's actually quite a number of us. And that is in the 10 years before I wrote the book Theory U, or as long as it took. I mean, that's another way of putting it. So I actually went around and did workshop just like this one, right? But in person, of course, and basically put up the U slide and said, now tell me, do you have any experiences like that? And I was just astonished to see how many people because what is the one word translation really of leading by presencing? Presencing leadership in a nutshell is leading by letting go and letting come, right? That's kind of what's happening at the bottom of the U. And that, of course, in the current moment where as a planetary community, we go through this, we all feel something is ending. We are at a threshold collectively, and something else is beginning to be born. And we are kind of the generation that's in between, right? The old is not quite gone and the new is not quite there, but we are in between. And it's kind of so this letting go to letting come, that's what we are living through as a planetary moment right now. Kind of that is kind of the rupture and fracture that people are talking about and that we are living through. And so it is not, and that's of course what's going on in organizations, right? Anyone who has gone through one of these deeper cycles of knows this letting go and letting come from personal experience. So if you hold spaces today where you allow people to bring forth, to articulate some of these deeper experiences, it's just amazing how much happens in a short period.
Mm.
And so I think it's just kind of worth mentioning when I look at the chat here. So on the practices, the first one is awareness. So that's an intentional choice, right? Leadership does not start with your vision. Leadership starts with becoming aware. And how does that work? It means to know when to stop, right? Becoming aware is essentially what is the mechanism that does that? It is, one way of answering that is what I already said earlier, suspension, redirection, letting go. But it is really, in essence, it is beginning to pay attention to our attention. That's kind of where we begin to become aware, right? We're not just attending to stuff habitually, but we are, developing a meta attention, right? That's what awareness is. Paying attention to your attention. And what that really is, it's bending the beam of observation back onto itself, back onto its source. So that's kind of the meta awareness. So we not only notice stuff around us, but we are beginning to notice our noticing. And just in the age of the attention economy and in the age of the attention fracking industries, which is exactly the same companies that are the trillion-dollar companies of our time, that capacity to pay attention to our attention is really a very foundational skill. So awareness is number one. Then listening is what I already went over a little bit. It's the deepening. Or let me just add one more thing on the awareness, and then I will go much faster through the other one.
Please.
So here's an example. We all know what happens. So if I take a stick and I throw it in front of a dog, we all know what's going to happen, right? The dog is going after the stick. If I take the same stick and I throw it in front of a lion, the lion is turning his head and looking straight at you. So the lion is turning the attention from the object to the source. How often in our organizations and in our societies are we responding to disruption and stuff that happens in the mode of the dog? right? Just reacting against whatever it is that life has thrown in front of us, or the incentives that are dangling in front of us. And how often are we able in our organizations and in society to respond to disruption and stuff that happens in the mode of the lion? Turning the attention from the object to the source. And that, in essence, is really what systems thinking is. So all the other ones are an application of that root principle, right?
Okay.
So listening is really kind of deepening the listening to not only what is, but really to the generative level, right? Where something new can enter in the conversation. Dialogue is not just people talking to each other, but it's the capacity of a system to see itself, to inquire its own assumptions, like you would do in a strategy process or a scenario process, right? Making visible the assumptions that we hold about the future. Presencing is the deep sensing that we talked about, right? Kind of connecting with what is it actually that's looking at me. Co-imagining is really the capacity to crystallize that, right, and link it with our own intentionality. Co-creation really is kind of remember the design thinking and all that stuff. It's the learning by doing, essentially, right? Exploring, it's not piloting, it's not translating an idea into practice, but it's exploring the future by doing. That's kind of prototyping is pre-pilot. And the last one, ecosystem governance, really is about the capacity. So what are we seeing right now? Kind of the regression of governance, right? What do you see out of the White House? Unilateralism, right? Unilateral dominance as a principle, and kind of a blended with occasional some transactionalism. What is it that the world? So we are moving from multilateralism backwards, right, to those two. But in other parts of our societal experience and also of our governance experience, I would say, when you think about what's happening in cities, what's happening locally, and so on, we move towards ecosystem governance. What does that mean? It means organizing around shared awareness and intention. Where does that happen most naturally? In disaster response. So think about when a disaster happens in our family context, right? What is it we do? We come together. We pay attention to what's happening. And then spontaneously we coordinate. Everyone is pitching in whatever is necessary by the situation. That's exactly what's happening in disaster response.
I think Corona
on a
is a great
country
example.
or on a place-based level. And so that's, I believe, something that even though it's existing already kind of on city levels and some other local levels, that in the future will be relevant a lot more also on other systems levels.
I wanted to add the example which we all know and we all lived through, which is Corona, which was a unique, fantastic effort to collaborate. And I think most people argue this has been the fastest way to get to solutions, which through traditional, more competitive and unilateral ways would not have been achieved. So it talks to your example. Corona, I think, is such an example.
I would say Corona is an example of both what I said, right? You have this move towards ecosystem governance, but you also have kind of the unilateral stuff, right? We have seen both of that.
That's true. Now, I do want to invite the audience to ask questions, more questions. The chat is open, of course. I'm going to operate the chat all the time. Meanwhile, I'm going to pick on one example that you mentioned, which is prototyping. Now, I'm not suggesting we double click on prototyping per se in terms of co-creation, co-imagination, but I actually want to get to a different point that has to do with prototyping, I think. Where do you suggest leaders find the courage to start this to use any of the seven, to use what you call a presencing kind of process. You repeat the word letting go and letting come often. And again, for many leaders, letting go has a connotation of losing control. And this is where, if I understood you correctly, you suggest the idea of trying, of do a prototype of this process and actually get involved. Do not consider this as something that you do once and there may be an epic way how to get it wrong or fail. Tell us about how people find the courage to actually start this kind of cycle and dare to go into this.
Well, I don't know all the stories. I think of the stuff that I do know, I would say the key is what the key is often a dissonance. I remember I was holding a space. So I'm currently doing something with business schools, right? Helping them to transform themselves from being an amplifier of extractive practices to more regenerative practices, right? So, which would be something new. Basically, business as a force for good. And at the end of one of the first sessions that we did, one faculty person said, I feel my dissonance acknowledged. So that was her feedback, right? And I love this because I think it's a very precise description of an experience that many of us have. I feel my dissonance acknowledged. Now, I had not the possibility to really ask her what she really meant with that, but I have my own interpretation because I have
Yeah,
seen similar things very often. And my own interpretation is this. I know in myself, and many people feel that, right? That this is I want to be part of a different story of the future. And I know that something else is called for right now, but I don't know how, right? And I'm frustrated about what it is that currently in our organization and in our leadership we collectively create. So there is like 2 out of 3 people worldwide want to be part of a different story of the future, but they don't know how. And also 2 out of 3 people feel a loss of collective agency. So in other words, they say what happens in my institution and country has nothing to do with my own voice, has nothing to do with my own intention. So I think that is the moment we are in. And what's missing there is space. It's a space where you can experience that the other people, because interestingly, when you look at the surveys, most people think, well, it's just me, right? I want to be part of a different story, but the most idiots around me, they just they just want to do the old way. And it's actually interesting that most people believe that. And so there's a misperception about the potential of change that is real in the world right now. How many people, and what is how does that show up in current reality? Frustration. Or as this lady said, the faculty member, I feel my dissonance acknowledged, right? There is a
interesting.
dissonance between what we do collectively and what I really want to see happen. The missing space is the missing piece is space. It's a collective space where we can have a conversation in which we realize it's actually 2 out of 3 of us kind of who want to see something different. And how can we move from this felt frustration to a spirit of experimentation and creating something new, beginning with how I show up and how we connect with each other. So
Interesting.
that's what I would say is the leverage point. And that's what is sometimes difficult to do. But whenever you do it, that's my experience, there's a very significant response. And my prediction would be the response will be even more significant going forward because the frustration goes up.
So I'll pick up on exactly that word, frustration. You used it now a couple of times. I remember when you were addressing the audience in Barcelona, You gave an idea on one of the purpose finding methods. Look at your frustrations. That was one of your learnings from somebody in the past. And I want to combine it with a question we got online that says, what is alive in you and theory you at this moment? I want to rephrase this question. Where is your current frustration respective to the maybe under usage, under leverage, the lack of exploitation of what you specifically bring to bear, making it personal of where do you see you spending your energy in the next 5 to 10 years, addressing your frustration?
Well, no shortage on that on that score. So,
Give us a
so
top two, not more.
no, I would stay with one.
Sure.
I would say, and I don't think I'm actually in any way alone in that. So, what I try to the basic, I'm not sure I really talked about the concept of social soil. So, what I mean with social soil is really qualities of awareness, ego to eco, right? They're shifting the awareness more kind of to an ecosystem awareness, and the quality of relationships, really kind of from more toxic or transactional relationships to more generative and co-creative relationships. So what I try to do, and what we see, of course, today is in the age of capitalism, right? So much for conscious capitalism, also, right? In the age of capitalism, I would say, or at least current capitalism. So I can also make that qualifier. And in the age of AI, what is AI doing? Super amplifying all the stuff we have seen before. And what we see is actually a shift in capitalism to a stage that historically we had before. Because, what Amazon is doing, right, who bought Whole Foods, I mean, that alone, right, isn't that like a message there? If that's kind of your number one exhibit of what you try to do, and then it's acquired by someone like Amazon, I think it's a pointer towards perhaps something that needs to be extended and more developed in the framework. So what we see there is a transformation of capitalism that is really, you know, uh, it's a structure that we know from feudalism in Europe, right? That's where we know that from. It's a techno-feudalism. And it's not kind of, you're not competing against these guys. You're kind of also not their customer, you're the product. And kind of that's kind of the attention economy. So in that context, I would say that the main thing that I try to do is to improve the quality of the soil. And I believe this will only happen if you democratize access to these methods and tools, not just a few leaders here and there, but you need to democratize the access. That's why I founded the Presencing Institute. Kind of that's really what we do. We develop the methods and tools. Kind of they have quite a profound impact when they are used, but they need quality holding spaces. Also, kind of to allow for the democratization to happen. And that, of course, as anyone who has built a social enterprise knows, that takes effort and resources. And if you want to create and generate resources, right, for an enterprise that is focusing on not extraction, but the regeneration of the social soil, right, quality of relationships, quality of awareness, and democratizing access to these tools, that's just very hard to do, right? And it's like, there's so much money in the wall, but not going into that direction. And I would say the Presencing Institute is an example of that. There would be so much possible, and it is, it is um, it is something that, is experienced by many people kind of who try to work in that direction. And I
Yeah.
would say that's a genuine systemic threshold that we face, where something in the way we capitalize, we distribute resources, and we capitalize enterprises, including social enterprises, where there is something missing in our current setup. If we want to move into the future that is different than civilizational collapse, which is
Yeah.
what clearly we are heading towards currently. That's something you usually can't say, but I just had a conversation with other faculty, right? That's the one thing you can't say in a business school, even though that's the one thing that many students think about, because not everyone is blind.
Indeed. Well, I think this answers one of the questions, not by coincidence, that we got on the chat by David Arel on the accessibility and making it widely available. And you're talking about the democratization. So thanks for that. And I want to turn to everything we talked about, combining it with one of the projects that you're currently participating. This is the way we met around transforming business education to include many of these features. If you spoke to a room of young students, and you often do at MIT and other institutions, what is your guidance, your hint, sharing experiences on the inner tool or inner skills these young people in your mind should develop, foster, disseminate?
Well, I'm not, I try to avoid the should, honestly, right?
Fair.
I'm
Okay.
not like, that's not my style, right? I'm not your pope, right? Kind of, so no. So it's more like I try to partner with the awareness that's already there. And you need, in companies, it's actually the same thing, right? You always need to partner with the awareness that's already there and
Interesting.
help it to go to the next step. And I try to avoid the should and help people to see the complexity, right? And that's kind of so it goes to the ego to eco conversation we had earlier. And I would say, but I can answer what is it that's really most helpful to people because people talk to me back, right? So, and
Mm.
it's I'm actually surprised by what it is. It's listening. And listening is it's like sounds so small. We talked about it before, and it's definitely something, whether we consider it or not, that we practice 16 plus hours a day, right? Each of us, right? And how I would have thought, like 20 years ago, when you would have told me the work I'm doing in the world, I would have, and so then changing the way you listen, right? And I would have thought, well, that takes a long time, right? That's a basic human condition, how you engage with the world. That's very
Yeah.
hard to change. And my experience is that's not at all true. So if you need a method, right? You need a practice. You need kind of a little practice circle, right? You need a social context, right? And then kind of some support structure. But if you put these things into place within 6 weeks, you can see profound shifts in your level of listening. And again, when the level of listening is shifting, kind of your world experience, kind of everything is shifting around you, including the space of possibility that you experience. So I have found the listening, both with mid-career executives, which are a lot in my class, but also with young students, very, very practical. And the other thing I would say I would add to that is the deep sensing or the presencing. So when I, first wrote the book 20 years ago, I mean, you could, I had to talk like for an hour to basically explain what it is. And of course, not many people were. No, it's not true. I'm exaggerating. So practitioners with experience always resonated with that. But there was a lot more skepticism around that. Today, I think there is a much more, because we live in this moment where very clearly something is ending and very clearly something else is happening. And perhaps it's not just doom and collapse, but there is kind of a shift of awareness and consciousness, right? That allows us to really kind of operate on a different level. And that, of course, is the heart of theory U, that you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. And that you cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. And it's kind of these conditions are on an individual end that is listening, but on a more social and collective dimension, it has a lot to do with the deep sensing experience that I try to share a little more, and that I refer to as presencing, and that I would say has a lot more intuitive connectivity right now, and that is the one thing I would point to right now.
That's a beautiful summary. Actually, I would like to thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the audience, because we have 1 minute left, and typically people have a tough time, a tough schedule. This was very inspiring, very inspiring. I would like to thank Otto for your hour. I know we have a gift to actually condense these highly complex topics that I find difficult, to condense them in very comprehensible messages and practical advice, even though you don't like the should, but there's a tendency to ask for the practicality of what you have actually found. With that, let me actually wrap up this session. Thank you very much. Let me point out to the next dialogue. I'm quickly putting it in the chat. We're going to have Peter Matisse. Many of you know him. He's a founder, current CEO of the Conscious Business Institute, as well a conscious thought leader, using this term and working on conscious business for the last 30 years before many coined the term. And with that, thank you very much and have a good day, everybody.